Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Dave, and today I'm joined by Wayne. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good. So, you run a program through Bed and Breakfasts, basically playing D&D called Adventure Away. Can you kind of introduce yourself a little bit and kind of tell us a little bit about that and yourself?
Sure. My name is Wayne Denier, and I'm the head dungeon master and creative director for Adventure Away. We are a D&D B&B, Dungeons and Dragons Bed and Breakfast. We've been around since 2018, and we've run many, many games that are weekend retreats. So people that want to play Dungeons and Dragons will book with us and spend a 3-day weekend playing up to 10 hours of D&D 5th edition. They arrive on Friday night. They get catered lunch and dinner and continental breakfast and a room to stay and play with a house dungeon master. So we run a game. We've run a lot of off-the-shelf Wizards content, including Curse of Strahd, which we have another game coming up next month, which will be our 3rd annual Curse of Strahd Valentine's Day game. And we do a variety of other games as well, including a Wizards only game that we do on Halloween. And this year we're going to be taking the new Avatar: The Last Airbender RPG that released on Kickstarter and running our first Bender weekend. So that should be fun too. We've started out with as a mom and pop shop. Me and my wife Apple are the tag team duo that runs this thing. She does hospitality, social media management, and makes people feel comfortable. And I've been weaving stories for dozens of players as the head dungeon master, but I'm not the only one. We have 2 new dungeon masters that have been with us for over a year, and we're growing, and we're excited to see more people and play more as well.
It sounds like you gave the missus all the hard jobs while you play games.
This is very true. Yeah. But I do I sometimes I go by the nickname Hodor because I'll show up just to carry some stuff in and out because I'm 6'2" and I have enough muscles for a nerd to pick up and carry all the stuff, nice. All of our materials in. I justify it that way. She's definitely the engine.
Play the games and pack mule.
Totally.
Yeah, nice. As always, folks, there are links down in the description below. You can check them out. I feel obligated to mention we have a Kickstarter going on that's fully funded. The Mage Forge, you can check that out as well. Where did this idea come from? Because I haven't heard of any other D&D bed and breakfasts before finding you guys.
Yeah, it's a very new space, and that's a little daunting in some ways because there's not a manual for how to do this. But there's 2 places that we drew our inspiration from to start the business, which was mostly just an idea while we were driving around in the car in 2017 discussing different things about my wife's theater background and arts management experience and my experience as a seasoned 10 plus years dungeon master and a game designer. And the way we settled on it was kind of related through our personal experience and taking vacations ourselves in Virginia. We'd go and do a wine tour and sample some cheeses and take a little ride around town. But we were also bringing games with us. We had decks of Magic cards, and we had a Wii U plugged into the TV and back in our room, and we were gaming the whole time. And we thought, well, maybe we could just make this the thing. Is we invite people in, we make sure that they have a nice, comfortable place to stay, that they're well fed, they can just hang up their worries and cares for the weekend, and we just run a game of D&D. And the second place that we pulled inspiration from was just trying to do this ourselves at home. That when I had my own campaign over a decade ago that was kind of reaching its big moment, I tried to pull our group together of 8 to 9 players and make sure that we did a grocery store run, book a cabin, see if everyone's schedules matched up, and then split the cost and all that. And it was hard. I just found that as a dungeon master at home, trying to soldier through my own, crazy, insane notes of where my campaign was going, that it was tough to just go through bare logistics to try to get a bunch of grown adults to set things aside enough to come out. And when we fused all that together, that became what we are, Adventure Away. So you can just book with us and drive out and bring dice if you want, but we provide dice for everybody too. So we take new players, we take old players. I think one of the things I really like about this is the people that maybe they played on first edition, second edition, and that life just got away from them. They had a couple kids, they got busy, and they're just looking for a place to kind of ease into it. And it's tough to just go buy all the books and try to find half a dozen people in your neighborhood, but look, you can just click a button and come book and then hang out with us. So it's really the lowest friction possible to come out and have a good time and get in some hours of D&D, and hopefully going home just electrified by role playing and wanting to go out and play more at home and with your friends.
Whenever you try something new, it's kind of scary, but especially when you try something and you're like, well, no one else is doing that. So like for me personally, I have to ask myself, is it that I just have a stupid idea, or am I a genius that came up with something no one else did? And like we were kind of like early in this space in 2014, and we had thrown all kinds of ideas, high-end events, kind of like D&D in a castle, or even what you guys are doing, subscription boxes for like D&D stuff, and we're like, would people want this? And it's funny, like we came up with all these ideas, and we slowly but surely watched them all come to life. And it just makes you wonder too, like was there a space for it back then or not? So how much that did you have to kind of grapple with when you're getting started?
A lot and constant. There's a book that comes from the people that made the program Basecamp. That's kind of like a how-to guide for how they operated their company as a lean startup. And one of the chapters is the 7-year overnight success. So the theme of that is just that, like, you might seem like you came out of nowhere to somebody, that like you're super successful, and that the job it's $1 million idea, and it seemed like you blew up out of nowhere. But that's just how people perceive it. There's always this slog ahead of time, especially in these spaces where nobody's tried it before, where you're not really fitting a box people understand. You get that curious head tilt, kind of like a golden retriever that doesn't understand what you're talking about. But then eventually you reach critical mass, and then it makes sense. So yeah, like in year 4 now for us, we're still on that path where we'll talk to some people that give that little head tilt, especially like other businesses or local regulations. They're like, so you're a bed and breakfast, so you are primarily focused on having a commercial kitchen and like a hotel thing. And I'm like, you get, okay, I must be explaining it wrong. And you learn to stop internalizing it. Just say like, this is a good idea, and I'm going to keep putting time and effort into it. And we have kind of a mantra that's true believers only. And that came from the opposite reaction when we talk to people and they think for a moment and go, exactly, wow, okay, I'm on board, of course. Why hasn't this happened before? And the answer is that like people don't always get on board with something they don't understand right away, but some do. Some like they just make that connection. And we tie ourselves to that, like the customers that we serve and the people that love gaming that just think, well, duh, and that's how you pull yourself through those 7 years. And at some point, like, yeah, maybe it'll become so commonplace that people are like, yeah, D&D vacations. I totally heard about that. But we're not there yet. We're still in the weird space.
There's been a lot of friction with pro DMing, in the community. It's a topic that comes up. It's always like a hot, kind of a hot spot. But I feel like it's getting a lot better, and people are becoming more accepting, and the naysayers are kind of being quieted a little bit. Do you find by pairing pro DMing with like a vacation, that kind of like squashes some of that?
It takes some of the edge off. We still do like individual contract games where someone says, no, we really just want a DM. And so the people that want a pro DM that are asking for it, we provide it. But it does take the edge off to say, objectively, we're giving you a nice place to stay and food. So, like at least come out for that.
Yeah.
And the pro DM is part of it. But the thing I think I want to like say as a comment on that topic for pro DMing is that some of the stigma just comes from the underappreciation of dungeon masters and the work that they do. And, from my time of DMing for about 10 years before I went pro, I was doing work I didn't get paid for, and I did it out of love, and I did it for people that I care about, that I wanted to see at my table, and I wanted to give them something new and interesting every day. And there are so many dungeon masters out there hustling for their home groups, and I would say y'all deserve it. You at least deserve someone to bring pizza. If you're not getting paid in pizza, then please advocate for it. But there's another side to pro DMing, which is something I didn't expect, which is that you just have to put people's pleasure and joy first before the structure, before the campaign, before the rules, before the mechanics. And like, if someone's going to come out and spend the weekend with you and play D&D, you don't get the exact same permanence as you do in a long-term campaign. So you can play a little more loose with it, but you really got to play loose. Like, you have to just, rule of cool your way through it and set aside any reservations you have, because if you're a pro, you're going to deliver. And that's the thing that I make note of and try to remind myself of all the time if I'm being a pro DM.
That's a really good point, especially when you start pairing it with a vacation, like you said. At this point, I feel like I've run for one of the highest paid tables, in the world. I mean, like, 6 players that you figure between travel and the vacation itself is close to $5,000. That's $30,000. So it's like, if you have a bad session, right, you're like ruining someone's vacation. Do you feel pressure from having people come out to the bread and breakfast and being like, well, this might be their vacation for the year?
I do, and where the puzzle gets really complicated is that you may have a couple of different types of players at the table. So on the left, you might have a min-maxer that has just tried to break their character in the game as much as possible. And on the other side of the table, you have the person that has a backstory that is very long and very involved and wants to role play. And then on the back end of the table, you have somebody that has not played much or at all and is super quiet. And there's different solutions to each one of those players. And it requires this like laser focused decision making that will allow everybody to be what they want at the table, and then also challenge them. So, the challenge for the quiet player is to invite them in with an enticing role-playing scenario, while the challenge with a min-maxer is to find that thing that meets them on the battlefield that actually gives them something to use all of their crazy abilities for. And I'm looking at you people that have crossbow feet. You know who you are. Quick loading.
So in the chat, they're lobbying for you to hide things around the bed and breakfast for the participants to find.
Oh yeah, argued a little bit. We actually had somebody come up to us and go, "Hey, we found this small treasure chest in our room. What does it mean? What do we get?" And I was just like, "Oh wait, like a previous guest had just left some little tchotchke from their own."
Yeah.
And they really did think it was part of an ARG or a mystery escape room thing. So I'll take that note. Yeah. I think a little bit more physical, like secrets, hiding stuff. I think that could be fun.
I also see lobbying for loosening floorboards to put stuff under as well. So I don't know if you can do that. But...
Well, even in the escape room, they'll tell you it's like, look, the furniture's bolted down. Don't try to move it.
Yeah. That's funny. So how often do you find you're getting like brand new players, like a group of people going, hey, we've never done this thing, let's get together and do a weekend and do the thing for the first time?
We don't often get 100, like a whole table full of people that have never played. But what we do get, as we book by double occupancy typically. So there are rooms that have a queen size bed, and it's kind of implied that you'll bring somebody who you don't mind sharing a room and a bed with. So it's people with their significant other and coming out. And in that scenario, it's often that one person has a lot of experience, and the other one's just like, well, I guess I'll go with you, kind of thing. I really, really enjoy those games and those pairings because you see them come out of their shell, find something about the game that resonates with them, and then they get to go home with their significant other and have this language that was missing before. And like, it's very satisfying to facilitate that.
They're lobbying hard for false bottom furniture to be included. Brian wants to know: do you run any adventures that take place in an inn? Seems like it might be pretty immersive.
Yeah, I did. I often do something that I'm going to probably release as a template for new dungeon masters called Mansions of Madness, and it's whenever I'm in a bind that I'll go to that well, that there is a property somewhere close by to a town. Some poor soul wanders into the tavern and says, I got scammed. I bought this house sight unseen and it's full of goblins. Can you help me out? And they just go out and then clear it out. The coolest iteration of that was probably last year, that I always hide something either in the basement or the attic. And the secret that time was that the whole house was actually a walking automaton. And so once they got to the basement, they found a control panel that made the house just literally get up and start walking away.
Oh,
so,
nice.
I'm very familiar with running games and inns and tavern.
I know that you're a big board game fan, and when you mentioned the mansion adventure, it made me think of Betrayer, House on the Hill. My business partner Ted, he did an adventure. He made a D&D adventure out of that, and made a randomizer for like all the rooms and stuff. And I looked at it, I'm like, that's good, but why don't you just use the tiles? Like, they're right there. It's so much cooler. And then like he's done like several iterations, and then eventually moved to that. But he's kind of like turned that into a D&D adventure that he runs every once in a while.
Yeah, that's fun. And it's cool to repurpose a couple of things because, you never know when you've got a board game that nobody recognizes, and then you get to look really cool when you pull out the tiles. Where'd you get that? It wasn't just a board game I just bought and didn't do any work on. I swear.
So, how did you get into gaming?
I would say that I got into gaming via video games at a very young age. So I have a tattoo of the crest of the Knights of Hyrule because the very first game that ever lit up my brain was The Legend of Zelda on the NES. My neighbor got it because you could rent systems at that time, and they came in a big plastic case, and they didn't even own the Nintendo. They just rented it for a few days, and I knew I have to have that. And it went forward through Diablo on the PC. And then eventually I was playing World of Warcraft a lot, and 4th edition came out, which I lament that a lot of my body of work is on 4th edition, but I'm just happy that we got onto 5th and left that behind. Because 4E was definitely oriented towards people that have a video game background or even like MMOs and playing WoW. And we've shed a lot of those tropes now, but that was the gateway for me to start role playing. That alongside of playing a lot of miniatures games. So I did invest in a giant stack of cases with hundreds of dollars of Warhammer 40K figures that are still very dusty now. And I think it was a selling point for me after painting hundreds of figures to spend 4 hours being convinced that I can't win this game to just painting one figure for myself and having much better chances of enjoying myself, just being a character and losing sometimes, but then winning others.
And now, if you don't even have to paint them. You can get it 3D printed from Hero Forge, already colored, and they look way better than I could paint a mini anyway.
Yeah, I mean it's been so in the past for me for a long time. But I just got back into painting minis. Before COVID, the pandemic, we went to PAX Unplugged, and Jerry Holkins was nearby our booth, and he was hovering over a table, and it was the new Marvel Crisis Protocol miniatures game. So I looked at that, I got a little starstruck by seeing Tycho in person. And then I finally, just for Christmas, got me and my son the first core box set. So we've been painting, and I have a little Steve Rogers done, and he picked Ultron. So he's got his nice big metal Ultron figure, and we're just walking back through that chapter of the hobby, trying to learn to paint again.
I just saw, I think it's on Kickstarter now, a Marvel licensed Zombicide.
No way.
Yeah, I don't know what the rules are for that. Like, if it's really just going to be Zombicide, but like with a different skin, or if there's going to be different rules. But it's definitely a fun game. Like, if you got an afternoon to do something, it's one of the longer games I do that I kind of enjoy. Like, I generally have a 2-hour rule for my tabletop games, and it's like at 2 hours, it's like I should probably just be playing an RPG or something. But Betrayer of the House gets a pass every once in a while. Zombicide, I could definitely get in for some of that. Who doesn't like killing zombies?
I got a couple of the games that are like on that threshold that I'm trying to figure out how to get in my life, because I've got the Dark Souls board game, I've got the Ghostbusters tile-based game, very similar to Zombicide, and the Lord of the Rings Journeys to Middle-earth. I think Fantasy Flight has a couple of tile-based games like Star Wars Imperial Assault. I love the idea of them, but like you've got to get the rules down yourself, figure out how to explain the rules much quicker than the book does, so you can get a couple of people to understand and play fast.
Like some of those games, it seems like the setup is just as long as like the maximum amount of time I would even want to play a game, let alone this. Like Arkham Horror, like I played it once. It was like a 6-hour game, and it's like, okay, it's kind of cool that I did that, but I don't think I ever need to do it again.
And what sucks about that is like, you gotta take the first game as a hit. Like, you gotta just assume the first game is going to be like the one that takes 4 times as long.
Yeah.
And then you start getting returns in the second game and the third game and the fourth. But like, you still have to have some passion and some desire to keep going. And if the first game just kills you, then like it's not gonna go. It's not gonna fly.
Yeah. And also, admittedly, when it comes to tabletop games, I am definitely a filthy casual. My primary focus and thing has always been TTRPGs.
And we're the same way. Like, we kind of, like a lot of the tabletop stuff that we do outside of RPGs is just my family. So Apple and I have a son, and he's in 2nd grade. So he's kind of like the bar for what we can do regularly. And we go to the well every time. It's either Magic the Gathering, Sushi Go, Ramen Fury, or Trash Pandas, because they're just easy. And we figured them out quickly, and we could play them now, and it's just like no fuss, no muss.
Although I do have a soft spot for Quarriors and Smash Up.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I just started. We learned Kings of Tokyo, I think.
That's a fun one too. Yeah.
So yeah, like maybe we'll draft into the Smash Up and see if we can keep the momentum going on that.
Yeah, like especially if you don't like get too deep into the strategy and stuff, like for a young person, and they just have fun with like, I want robot dinosaurs, or I want wizard robots, and they don't really care about how effective the combinations are. You can still have fun.
You gotta have something to bring you to the game.
Yeah. So it's kind of luck anyway, but. So, do you guys also break out board games, or is it all like D&D the whole time? Like, run me through a typical weekend if I were to sign up, at one of these events.
Yeah, good question. So the way we do it is you're either gonna book with us as a whole gaming group, so it's like you and your friends, 6 or 8 people, or you just book a room, and then 4 other players will book the other rooms, and then you'll play together. and you arrive on Friday night, and we do a session 0 on Friday. So it's like low stress. You just get settled in and break out your character sheets, and like we'll turn on the music, and it starts in the neutral starting location, which could be a tavern or something. And prior to that, we send out a link to our Discord. So when you're there on Friday night, we've already talked about like, this is the level requirements that we have. We'll do either standard array or point buy for rolling your characters, so you can do it at home and you don't have to, worry about doing it last minute with dice in person. And people that are new can ask questions and like, well, what's allowed and what works. So just to maximize the amount of time that we have on the weekend, not just to game as much as possible, but also to keep it kind of relaxed. So after session 0 is done, we, in the middle of that, we'll have dinner and then everybody goes to sleep. In the morning, we have like a session that's starting at about 10 o'clock and goes up to lunch. And that's like a significant portion of the campaign for the weekend. People will already probably know a bit about what's going on after session 0. So if there's a big bad somewhere, if there's a major threat, or if there's a problem that needs to be solved, you're already thinking about it at the end of Friday, and then we just go for it on Saturday. We put a little break in the afternoon for 2 hours to just chill out, and that's a good time to break out board games or just take a power nap to take the edge off. And then we'll just keep going through till like 10 p.m. And all the while we take breaks to get our catered lunch and dinner together, so we get the orders together for everybody, and then just find the right moment in the witching hour of the day of where it's a good point that everybody's satisfied and can stop. And that's a little bit of a puzzle for me as a DM to make sure that it ends on a satisfying note, and that the big bad's not too far away or too strong that they can't, find something satisfying to hit at the end of the adventure. But that usually comes to pass. There's, I love it when it's like, past 8 o'clock and there's just some reason for everybody to stand up and start cheering. That's your goal as a DM, in my opinion. But then we don't do more gaming on Sunday. It's mostly just like a little recap, maybe an epilogue, people chatting, having coffee, getting their bags packed and leaving, because checkouts usually around like 10 in the morning. And that's kind of how the weekend goes.
So, pardon me. So, when did you guys start? I know we talked about this. Well, we did mention. I couldn't remember if we talked about it before or after we got started. It all blends together sometimes. So how many of these have you run so far?
I keep searching for the number, but just to do a general cut, like in 2018, we did about a game every other month. So there was about like 5 or 6 games in 2018. In 2019, we almost doubled that. So we were doing a game pretty much every month. And then the pandemic hit. So like our last formal game in 2020 was in January, right before things hit. And then we had a bit of a lull. We did like 2 online games and then an in-person masked social distance game in October. And then 2021 was a storm. We actually interviewed 2 dungeon masters as a soft hiring call during the January in 2020 before everything went down. And we found 2 excellent, talented dungeon masters, Brian and Eric. We didn't have a lot of work for them right away because lockdown happened right after that. But as soon as 2021 came, we had talked to the people that booked, that had plans to come out and vacation before the pandemic, and we were ready to give out refunds. And a lot of people did take it, but a lot of people just stayed with us and said, we're ready when you are, let's just put it back to next year. So once the vaccines came out and we were, fairly confident that we can provide a safe place for people to come in person, we got to where we were running 2 to 3 games a month. And we were very, very fortunate that Brian and Eric had joined us because that meant we could actually run that much. So we've been kind of doubling the amount of games we run year over year for a bit, and we're getting to the point now where, yeah, like the things are a little different with Omicron now, but like we're still going, and we're at that point where we can start really ideating and shopping the perfect property for us, where we can customize everything we want and really go like Rainforest Cafe with it, and make it environmentally immersive. And so for now, we bring what we can to our partner properties to use, music and lights, and keep people comfortable and feel like they're in it. But once we buy our next level property, it's just going to go like way into something else.
Yeah, now you had mentioned you were actually looking to do that before the pandemic, and probably luckily, the pandemic hit before you pulled the trigger, because that would have been a lot rougher for you as a new business for sure. But that's the goal, is to get a place that's kind of like you can use all the time. When you book a place, do you book the whole place out, or are you mixed in with the muggles when you're running your D&D sessions? How does that work?
It's exclusively ours for the times that we do it, and we actually we did a lot of exploration in our first year and tried out different properties, working with different people, like small places, big places, places that are more close to the city, and some that are a little farther out. And now we're just at the point where we have two partner properties that we bring a lot of business to, because they're the two that we use, and the more games that we get, the more that they get business. But for the weekends that we're there, it's ours. We just can't pull up floorboards. That's all.
Yeah, we kind of had this interesting experience where the first year that we did D&D in a castle as Nerdarchy, and we ran games, we were getting ready to get on the plane to head over to England, and our point person contacts and says, "Hey, I don't want you to be alarmed, but you're going to a castle. It's just not the castle we told you you're going to. The bank seized that one, and we've had to move things around." So luckily, they'd already been scouting other locations and talking to folks, and there was one that was able to accommodate them. But they didn't have the whole property the way they would have normally did it, and literally one of the nights was like a high school prom or something was there at the same time. So there's a bunch of hooligans running around.
Yeah, I guess we're lucky enough that we're small scale. We do 6 to 8 players, so we don't need the space of what a larger venue like that would do. But when we purchase a property, we are going to diversify. So they're Apple in a former life was an event and wedding planner, and I would say still is a very seasoned event planner. That's the whole reason our business works. And when we have that place, we can be doing nerdy weddings, we can do LARPs, we can do drop-in games through the week. And it will be fantastic when we have just unfettered 24/7 access. But then, and it will avoid that problem of worrying about double booking and worrying about whether or not they're going to be able to provide it or what their rates are. Because that's a huge part of it. Is part of what saved us was not having the monthly overhead of owning the whole place. But then at the same time, we have things we would like to do if we did own a whole place. Yeah. So it saved us during the pandemic because we didn't have to worry about that mortgage. But it's an inevitability, and we'll be there soon.
So do you play other games, other TTRPGs besides D&D?
I have been of two minds about that. That you go back a year and I was only 5th edition. Yeah. We just have to do 5th edition to keep it straight. And then I suddenly just pivoted around, and part of that comes from just things that are very relevant in pop culture. We had a lot of success with building games in the wizarding world, just homebrewing 5e. and people really resonated with that. And there's some rumblings in the community about whether or not like the original source material is very valid, because there's a lot of not acknowledging people in the LGBTQ community. We're 100% supportive of every lifestyle, and so like our version of it is kind of branched off into, hey, look, be who you're going to be. We just like magic spells, so we're not going to hitch ourselves to that card. But we also like want to get into the superhero space, so we've looked at the official Marvel game, and I think capes from the is it the Apocalypse? Yeah, I think the Apocalypse system, which I think is also the base system for Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I think there's also I think it's either Nexus Core, or there's another system that's the base for a couple other games like Leverage and Tales of Xadia, which is the Dragon.
Cortex. You're thinking of Cortex.
Yeah, so we're probably going to go into Powered by the Apocalypse and Cortex Core next year to do some other theme games. And I even did Rysis, which is a D6 system, just to do some like off the cuff, like low rules, mostly role playing type of game, and that actually worked out really well for a private game. So yeah, I think we want to provide a predictable experience where people can come and play without knowing what's going on, and that's what's led us to staying on 5e for so long. But you got to evolve, and you have to make things that are interesting. So this coming year, we're going to have some things that are not just 5e, and we're going to probably keep growing that way too.
Monster of the Week would be like a great game around Halloween. Also Powered by the Apocalypse game, so it's pretty easy to get into. And also too, like, it's funny that like D&D tends to be the gateway game for most people, but it's far from the easiest game to learn in comparison to some of the other ones out there. Have you had requests from groups that want to book out and be like, hey, we'd like to do this thing, but not D&D?
Yeah, and I think that's where I led to standardizing, because the moment that I started to delegate and say, all right, I won't be the only dungeon master, we will have many dungeon masters, it's kind of hard to look at someone and say, oh, well, we need you to take this group of strangers that want a fun game, and you're going to write a unique module for it or take something off the shelf, and you have to learn a new system. Like, it's much. But I think the coming around to it, it's going to be more like, well, let's just find out what we all know and what we're interested in. Because like Brian is familiar with Powered by the Apocalypse. So if we're comfortable, then we'll run it. But then, it's about the both audiences. It's like, give the dungeon master a good place where they feel like they can do what they want and without stress. And also a place where the players feel like they know how to play and they're not going to spend the whole game in a rule book trying to figure out the mechanics. I'd rather people being in that place of agency where they're acting and trying to be themselves and use the mechanics to express themselves, and not be worried about like, well, can I cram in that bonus action? And that still happens in 5th edition. Like I was just playing last night. I was like, can I rage but then also do this other thing? And it's like, no. And then you're kind of architecting it to make it fit. The rules heavy parts of 5e make it accessible, but then it can also limit you too. That's what you get when you're the de facto standard for RPGs.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned that you do some like weeks where you'll run I guess like the big adventures, the official adventures. How do you do that in a 10-hour window?
Well, that's a good question, and I struggle with that every year when we do the Valentine's Day Vampires and Blood and Curse of Strahd, because it's a setting. Like, you're supposed to arrive in Barovia and see the effects of this castle of ultimate evil and how it has changed this town, and there's all these little houses and ways to get into the atmosphere. And you have to kind of smash cut and say like, well, Strahd just invited you over to hang out, and you're in Ravenloft and you're running around. And I think it's kind of like when you're trying to reduce a sauce, like you just gotta sit and simmer on it a bit and find out what really matters in this setting and make sure that you hit the notes. So like, what's Strahd's relationship with his former love? Why is he on this quest to do what he wants to? And why is that brought this this new young woman who reminds him of his old love into his sphere, and what's going to happen with that? And that's the central concept of how we run those Valentine's games, is focusing on like, why are you going to come into conflict with Strahd, and why is he going to probably fight you, and why do you want to fight him? And just because you could do something in Barovia that never sees Strahd. There's so much to going on there, but then it's built to shoulder a whole campaign where, like if you're going to just say, I'm going to do a 10-hour game, what am I going to take from this source material and go from there?
Yeah, I think somebody did like a night with Strahd or something like that over on the DMs Guild, where they boil it down to like one session, one D&D session.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I even do like the doomsday clock thing. Like Strahd has plans, and he invited you to a wedding. Like that's the hook.
Yeah.
So this is going to happen in 3 days, and that does kind of like zoom the timeline up to the last pages of that book.
And I imagine too, if people have signed up for this, that you've kind of got the buy-in already. And if you know about even a little bit about D&D and kind of like the big adventures are out there, like you're not doing the whole thing. I mean, they're generally designed to go through like 10 levels of the game.
And when we get that Discord chat up ahead of time, I'll usually ask if we're planning to do off the shelf, because we've run Mines of Phandelver, we've run Forge of Fury. Like the Tales from the Yawning Portal is a great source book, because those are pretty compact adventures and they're close to being the right size already. But yeah, I don't want to walk people through something they played already. So I'll usually do like a warning. It's like, hey, we're thinking about doing this. And if someone's like, oh, I played that 5 times, then I'll be like, nah, forget it. We'll go with something else or homebrew it, move on from there.
Do you have any home games that you're currently in?
Yeah, I'm in 2 games, which I did kind of as like a meditation, like going to karate. Because dungeon mastering long enough, it's like I have to make sure I stay grounded in what it's like to be a player. So I'm playing in a Pathfinder group, Pathfinder 2.0, and my character in that campaign is called Ren Shellstrop. Shout out to anybody that likes The Good Place. I stole that. But he's a wandering gnome that has a little in common with Uncle Traveling Matt from Fraggle Rock. He was just such a ball of energy and a little much for his little forest community of gnomes that they said, you must go on a quest out there and write stuff down and then come back whenever you're ready. And then he just excitedly left home, and they're just like, whew, got him out of our hair. So
yeah,
he's an alchemist and he's a nut part. So like he's just chucking alchemical bombs in every direction and being chaotic, whatever alignment, probably neutral, mostly good, but maybe too much of an idiot to be truly good. And my second character is in a 5e campaign that I'm actually playing with Brian, our other DM, and he it's my character's a furball named Periovacar, and he's very Viking inspired. He's like a former farmer that is a very salt of the earth guy, kind of boisterous, and he's a barbarian, and he's sort of lovable to the point that you push him by either like insulting him or picking on one of his friends, and then the rage begins. So that's a lot of fun to play too. I guess I've just given up on being like straight edge characters. I'm just full chaos at this point.
I can definitely identify with that. And also, I feel like as a GM, especially if you do a lot of GMing or even been the forever GM, when you get a chance to cut loose, you just end up being ridiculous. So what are your thoughts of gaming and streaming?
My thoughts are that it is a psychological phenomenon that works. It doesn't seem to make sense that it would, especially to people that are maybe older, that are more grounded, which includes myself. Like I'm totally got, you know, like all of the old, there's a wall of plastic Nintendo cartridges over here. I remember what it was like to have a hard game. I didn't want to just watch people play. I wanted to play. But I do have some favorite streamers that I watch now, and getting to experience how they feel about it is rewarding. And it's like I watch people stream games I wouldn't play, like horror games, and they're actually really entertaining to watch because whereas, you know, I have memories of just trying to get through Resident Evil, the remake on the GameCube, and literally my butt cheeks launching me 1 foot into the air when there was a jump scare.
Yeah.
It's just a little much for me. Like I have Resident Evil Village, and I can't make myself play it because I just get too stressed out and my adrenaline spikes. But like I can watch something of it. So there's something going on that makes it worthwhile. It's strange that we like it so much, but like I'm part of it too. I'm watching people play games.
Do you watch any TTRPG streams?
I used to. Like I did season 1 of Critical Role, and I've even like Tales from the something tavern I should know. But again, like I'm showing my hand here that I haven't really stayed with one, and I can blame it on lots of stuff. Like, well, I got a family and then job, and like it's a 4-hour stream, so like I could probably find a way to put it in the background and enjoy it. But it's always been a real tough thing for me because like you're either going to be focused on something you're watching, or you're going to just put it on and hope that something happens that happenstantially just like gets your attention for a second and is cool. But that's what I struggle with is like, well, what's the proper way to consume this that fits?
Yeah, I feel like if you have to figure out how to do a thing to enjoy it, maybe it's not your thing. Like, you know, right? Well, I just wonder, like, if you guys considered like InHouse doing stream games to show people kind of like what you guys do.
Yeah, and I think that like we've had some people ask about like, will you stream one of the games you run? And I think for privacy reasons, like we do want people to feel like they're in a candid environment. So don't think I would stream with our players unless it was an upfront thing. It's like, hey, do you want to be on a live stream game? And then book it. But otherwise, I think like we are currently trying to figure out where we fit in the space. So Apple has an upcoming How to Play series that she's working on for board games. And I probably have 1 or 2 series coming up soon where I do dumb things. So I will likely stream me playing something ancient like Galaga or Pac-Man or the original Legend of Zelda. And then I might have a YouTube stream, or not a stream, but just a video content thing where I rant about stuff, analyze movies and characters, and do something like, what is the D&D alignment of the father of the Von Trapp family over the course of Sound of Music? That is one that I have planned, and I'm going to do it because I think the alignment system is an interesting prompt to players, and people hate on it because it is broken. But I think that it's a 2-dimensional solution to a 3-dimensional problem. And as human beings, we're very familiar with how over chapters of your life, you react and change based off your decisions and your environment. So like, I do want to kind of delve into stories of characters where alignment changes. And you talk about the Von Trapps, and you have this guy who's a straight-edged, lawful character in Austria, and then has a crisis of conscience because, well, Austria is in a dangerous position right before World War II, and he had to make a decision. So, like, I would rant about that kind of stuff for a long time. So that might be forthcoming.
to Nazi or not to Nazi?
Thank you for giving me the title.
That is the question. And instantly demonetized.
Whatever. I'm doing this for me.
Yeah, no, that's definitely cool. Because also, like, it's also becomes a great way to kind of get the word out on what you're doing, and you know, if you were to put together like a stream game of not just random people that show up for your event, I don't think that's a good idea. Plus, like, you would not want to put that online. You never know what's going to happen in a game.
Oh yeah, like you gotta let people have a safe place to come unhinged a little bit.
Yeah, but it might be a good way to showcase like your GMs and how you guys run games. And I know even for like D&D in the castle, we got a mix of people that were like, oh, we're coming here because we want to actually play in your game, and other people were like, nope, never heard of any of the GMs. And I just started like researching them, and I thought, your style would jive with the way I play the game. So like it gives people a little bit of that as well.
And that's where going to these expos really helps us. Like we've gotten a number of folks, like the sales funnel is complicated and weird, but it's all about people like experiencing a little bit of content, getting to know us, so that they're compelled to want to do something, whether it's like come play with us or just tell their friends about it. And we'll talk to people that saw us in 2019 and like they just remembered who we are this year because they saw us one more time. And we try to be present. So Apple is great about our social media presence. She has profiles on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram where she updates regularly. And yeah, we're trying to put more stuff on YouTube too, because if they see our smiling faces and they want to come and hang out and they feel like they know us, then that just helps us do what we do more, and bring people here.
Yeah, you've done a bunch of these now. Do you feel like there's like a kind of like a archetype for your customer, or is it been more diverse than that?
I think there is not one archetype. I can probably classify them into 5 or 6 buckets. Like as I was saying before, you have like it's every kind of player So like the people that know the rules front and back, they're up to date on Unearthed Arcana, they're looking at beta previews, they are engineering characters that solve the problem of D&D by being as versatile or purposed as possible, and they'll challenge you. Like they will, if having imposter syndrome is a double-edged sword, because it'll make you feel like you don't know what you're doing, but then you get comfortable with not knowing what you're doing enough to get through stuff you actually don't know what to do about. So when you get hit with that one rule you don't expect to see coming, you just get comfortable with doing rules checks and making a call in the moment. And then you have players that are on the other side that like just don't know the rules at all, and you just say, hey, you just do a thing, okay? Just tell me what you're doing, walk across the room. I'll let you know how that works out mechanically. There'll probably be an ability check. I'll tell you where to look on the character sheet. We'll roll some dice. It's fine. And so you're on the spectrum there between those kinds of people and just getting to know like what the person's at the table for, what they're missing, what they want, and how to, give them what they want, but break them out of their comfort zone a little bit and give them an experience at the game they haven't had before. And make, you want everybody, my goal is to have everybody grow a little bit. Like someone's going to roll a death saving throw. A lot of people are going to have to do things they're not good at and do skill checks they don't think are going to work, but someone's going to do something surprising they didn't expect. And that's where the round of applause comes, where like the whole table starts cheering because the person that didn't think they were going to do a great charisma check somehow convinces the guard that they should just let them through, and it works. And and I think that's what I seek out in the game, is those moments where people surprise themselves, and what they're capable of. And that's probably a fair bit off of the question you asked me, but I guess that's where I arrived.
So do you have a process, like a screening process, when you bring in new players that sign up for an event and you're kind of like prepping to kind of understand who's going to be at the table before you get to the table?
Yeah, and that comes from just speaking on Discord some. Again, like we just put out the bullet points of how to make your character. So we typically start at level 3 or 5, because those are great for a new player. Like 3 is not too overpowered, but it still has subclass options for a lot of classes, so experienced players don't feel like they're too shut off. And a table full of 8 level 5 players can kill a god. I mean, it's just the way the game is. So Like if we really want to put it in the horsepower, we'll go to that. But then any other questions that people have, and we do try to communicate ahead of time so that most of the expectations are set. So there's a little bit of a personality exchange. Everybody that's in your party that will play will be on the same Discord, so you can actually like chat about party composition. Like, hey, I was going to be a healer. Is there anybody doing that? Is there a tank yet? And then that kind of just greases the wheels. So, characters are created. People probably chatted a little online first. It's gotten a lot of that like first impression stuff out of the way. And then that's also why we keep things light on Friday night, is to be more focused on not mechanics, but people just getting comfortable, having dinner, chatting, getting to know one another as people, and then getting to know one another as characters. People do that introduction on Friday night in session 0. So that like all of that is optimized so that the screening is complete by the end of Friday night, which is not to say screening in a way that we're gonna like say a lot of no. Like I have a comedy improv background, so I'm very yes and very inclusive as much as I can be. And it's mostly about just setting expectations with everybody so that we're all playing the game we want to play, regardless of what our goals are to get out of that game.
So, have you had any bad experiences since you've started this?
I think it's inevitable, and the answer is yeah. And I always internalize that. I think about like, well, what could I have done? I'm the professional, so I have to be professional. But that's where the bad experiences have come from is usually missed expectations. We've had to change our policies to be more upfront about things. Like it's very hard to book a room where somebody doesn't plan to play, because that actually robs the seat at the table, and that's harder to run a whole game. We've had people that are not familiar with what the accommodations are going to be like, so they may have had expectations for a room that's a certain size or a bathroom. And I guess that's the process that I go through, that we go through personally. We have bad experiences. We always try to figure out what we could have done differently, and that going forward, how to do it differently so that those things don't happen again. But you can't, people are people. And what we do is bring together lots of kinds of people. And so sometimes that puzzle doesn't get solved the way we want to. We just try to keep moving,
Have you had to put together a band list yet?
Mentally, yeah, but not formally.
Well, I know even like doing D&D in a castle, I know of at least one person that is like, your money's not good here anymore, just because they just had that kind of personality that was a bit disruptive, and and kind of took away from the fun of other players.
And the mantra that I mentioned at the opening is that we're true believers only. So that's not to say that we don't interact with people that don't believe. We do. Like there's people that just don't quite get what we are and are trying to put us into some sort of a bucket, and we don't fit. And it's trying to figure out what is our true self? How do we express ourselves properly so that people know who we are and the expectations are met? And that's the challenge, is always be as upfront and authentic as possible so that those bad experiences don't happen as much. But I've had to intervene. Like I'm a mediator. I'm the eldest of 4 children, one which is 10 years younger than me. So like I'm very understanding and comfortable with just having to kind of like get people in their corners for a second. And being a dungeon master is a unique position to facilitate that, because you can always just go back to, oh, well, we got to move on, or like, oh, this is happening. Goblins attack! Like you really have so many options to, like squirrel, move through situations that are unsavory. But if I think another thing is when everybody's trying to come and have a good time on a vacation, there is that shared goal of we're just trying to have fun. So I think that alone sets enough of an expectation with everyone that people are nice. or try to be, you know.
Yeah, obviously you're in a different position because it's a professional capacity, but oftentimes I feel like the onus is not always, but a lot of times misplaced on the GM to figure this stuff out. When in reality, we're all players at the table.
And
Just the GM has a different role.
One of the campaigns I'm in, actually, a lot of the games I played, we're all dungeon masters, and like in that group, maybe we just rotated through the year of who was running it, or this is the one that everyone's using to get a break. And those games, you see how people kind of manage up, or they like DM up from their position. Because as a player, you can say what you want, do what you want within the mechanics. So you can, in small ways, affect the party, and it isn't always on the DM. But yeah, there is this otherly power to the dungeon master that makes them seem all powerful, but like everybody has the power. You can do what you want in the game.
Well, what it stems from too is people trying to equate out of game problems with in-game problems, or in-game solutions for these out of game problems, and that is always a terrible way to go about trying to fix those.
Yep. No persuasion rolls against players. Period.
Yeah.
You got to make your case. If someone disagrees, they disagree. But there's no way in my games for people to rob agency of others, and that is something that I intervene on at times. Is you get the big brother character, like if you play Pandemic, where like because it's a cooperative game, someone who knows how to play the game better will lead. And I'm always really careful to make sure, listen, you might know D&D really well, and you might know that this solution will get you past this obstacle, like picking a lock. But telling the rogue they have to pick the lock is not the way the game works. And if the fighter wants to come up with a spoon and jab it in there and try, I am sure as hell going to let that person do it. And that's so I always take that stance, is that, like there is nothing that one player can do to take away someone other player's right of choice.
And that's definitely a good philosophy to have. So we were just past the hour mark. Final thoughts before we head on out?
No, I think that I've fully exhausted everything I have in my brain.
Nice. Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. As always, folks, down in the description you can find the links to check out Adventure Away, as well as the Kickstarter we have going on now. And until next time, stay nerdy.